Welcome to the Path Less Traveled podcast. I'm Craig Heatherly, your host. Here's the truth nobody warns you about. The higher you climb, the fewer people are willing to tell you the truth. The weight goes up, the circle gets smaller, and the isolation is real. And that's what we're getting into today. This is our Leadership Roundtable series. A few leaders in one room, no script, telling the truth about the hardest parts of the job. Today, how lonely is it at the top? Two quick thank yous to the sponsors who make this possible. Rippling, they bring HR, IT, and finance into one platform so the busy work that eats your week disappears and your team can focus on what actually matters. And the Ascent Collective. Most leadership groups focus on growing your company. They focus on strengthening the leader carrying the weight of it through fitness, faith, and brotherhood, because no leader was meant to climb alone. Reach out to Brian Wiesweaver to learn more. Today, I'm joined by Tim Leman, Chris Kingsley, and Mark Prifogle. Now let's get into it. With that, we'll kick this over to our panel guest. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, just provide a little bit of background on you, your organization, and maybe why you said yes to this topic or just this Leadership Roundtable series. Tim, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Okay, sure. Tim Leman, I'm the CEO at Gibson and get the opportunity to spend even more time with Craig Heatherly than the rest of you. And it's not a terrible thing, Craig, to spend time with you. But Gibson is an insurance and risk management broker. Craig's probably mentioned that. We've got offices in 9 states around the country. And I often talk about my role today as being kind of the mascot. We've got a great team, and I'm the hype guy and the evangelist and the recruiter and all those sort of things. I guess I made the post on LinkedIn that prompted this session, so I had to say yes when Craig asked me to be on this. But for me, Craig, just quickly on that, I think you've talked about like when did we first kind of notice some of that loneliness. I'm going to answer it in a little different way. As we've been transitioning leadership inside here at Gibson, we have President David Walters, super sharp, been with us since he was an intern many years ago. But I'm going to capture it from David's angle as he's now taken ownership of some big decisions. He had a tough one to make a few months back. And he came to me, he said, man, you've had me in the room for the last few years. Like, I know how you think. We've walked through stuff. I feel like I've been a part of some huge decisions with you. And he said, until I had to go do this by myself, I had no idea what you were talking about, even though I've sat in that room. Like I had to carry the weight of the decision, but what happens after the decision too. So that was really interesting for me to hear that back from him.
I can step in. So Chris Kingsley, President and CEO at ADEC Incorporated. We're a nonprofit disability serving agency. So we're located in Elkhart County, St. Joe County. Mission is to empower people with disabilities to live fulfilled lives in their communities. We've got a workforce of about 330 staff members. We serve about 1,150 unique individuals annually, all of whom have intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've been in this role. I've been in a CEO role in a nonprofit capacity for 8 years, and 3.5 of those here at ADEC. So I agreed to this conversation because Craig had somebody way more qualified lined up that had some scheduling difficulties, and he reached out and he said, well, hey, sometimes you have to go to the bench, and would you take it? So I said, well, sure, Craig, I'll get on and reflect on it. In all seriousness, though, Tim, I resonate a lot with the story you just told, because I was certainly blessed with a lot of access to the previous CEO when I made the jump in my previous organization, and had been a part of conversations around strategies and decisions and things like that. So I thought I had a pretty good sense for what it feels like in the seat. And I resonate a lot. Once you get in the seat, it changes. And it changes in ways you can't necessarily predict. And so that would be a message I would always give to people as they think about the seat is it will feel different than you expect. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just part of that jump.
Yeah, very good. My name is Mark Prifogle, and I currently serve as the Vice President of Operations for BHI Senior Living over their footprint in Indiana. So supervise 8 different life plan communities. And so those are what used to be called continuing care retirement communities. So individuals move in after retirement, they live in a home that we maintain. And then as their care needs shift, then they're supported within all those services right there on the same campus. Before that, I spent the previous 12 years as the CEO and group president of Grandview Health. And so that was a support services provider to the aging services industry, and left that organization after an acquisition. And been with BHI for the last 5 years. In addition to that, I am the national board chair for the American College of Healthcare Administrators, which is the professional society that represents post-acute and aging services leaders. And so that's part of the reason why I said yes, was just really wanting to highlight the role and the loneliness associated with the role of the post-acute and aging services leader. Our industry was very disproportionately negatively affected by COVID. And while we're 3 years removed from the pandemic, that psychological impact really on the entire workforce, including leadership, just continues. I'm also looking ahead and seeing it by 2040, we're going to have to replace 250,000 post-acute aging services leaders while adding another 65,000 leaders to handle the demand of the baby boomers. Leaders in this space are going to feel very isolated, and they do. And hopefully some of the recommendations that come from Tim and Chris really add to that conversation as we help develop those leaders and just recognizing how vital their networks are to their well-being.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. And Mark, those are some fascinating numbers right there. Thanks for raising awareness to that. Guys, let's jump in the deep end. Let's just get right into it. My first question for the group is, just be honest. When did leadership start to feel lonely for you? Was there a moment? Was it a slow drift when you started to realize that people around you may not fully understand just the weight? Tim, you mentioned the weight, what you're carrying. Yeah, I guess that's the question. Was it a moment? Was it a slow drift? And yeah, what's it been like for you? And whoever wants to jump on that and kick us off, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in
Right.
on this one.
Yeah, hit it, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a slow drift. I think as you come into an organization out of college and you're an individual contributor, maybe a manager for the first time, and you're amongst peers that you can share experiences with and some of that, but just as you go up the hierarchy within any organization, the number of people that really understand what you're going through gets smaller and smaller, and definitely in the COC. Leaning in on your direct reports doesn't work, or it doesn't work long term. And so having to really develop that network, because it is a slow realization that the higher you go, the fewer people that are going to understand what you have going on. I noticed that even in social circles and peer networking, that unless you've been in the seat, you don't really get it. And it also, even in your personal life, kind of creates some separation. People don't know what to do with when there's a CEO in the room. So definitely dealt with that. And also the loneliness that comes with understanding that my decisions are going to impact a lot of people and a lot of families, not just my own.
Yeah, happy to jump in as well. And I think I agree. It is kind of a slow drift as you change roles professionally. I think I resonate a lot with that comment, Mark, about really in every circle you're in, it does change things to some dynamic. I find, and I know this isn't unique only to the CEO role, there's other roles like this as well, but I probably just don't even try and explain a whole lot around it anymore. I just kind of move on to other areas of conversation. But I don't think any of us want to make it out as some mystic, ununderstandable type of thing, but there is just a reality to exactly what you said, Mark, of you just begin to realize that decision I was a part of previously, I now own that decision. Right. And I own the consequences, and I'm a human who makes mistakes, and my mistakes hurt people now in a way that they didn't before. And there's a lot of decisions when things go well, you get great input. You want to have that kind of relationship where you're collecting a lot of perspectives. And when you weigh them on the balance, and the other thing people don't understand is the balance, actually, because your perspective changes from the CEO role and you're balancing more stakeholders and more interests at that level. And that's not always as understood until you're in the role. But some of those decisions, they weigh out fairly straightforward on the balance. But you have those ones where you're at a crux and you know you have to make a decision and you know you're fallible, but a decision still must be made. And I think the loneliness in that particular position is that's where it's most acute.
And Craig, I think something that Chris was touching on there, and Mark as well, I think all agree to this too. I mean, it's an absolute honor and it's a privilege to get to sit in the chair. And so this issue kind of comes because you're sitting in that seat. Not many people there aren't many of those seats. Not many people have sat in them. That's people don't understand, but I don't think any one of us want anyone to walk away and feel sorry for us. I mean, again, that's
Right.
it's exciting, it's fun, it's all those things, but it does get lonely. And to me, two different things that jumped out. I think, I was probably always the one that when I was at some big national public companies, kind of chirping on the side about leadership. And the first time I didn't get invited to something kind of social because I realized like, oh, I'm corporate now.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't want, I didn't get invited. Like, I'm fun. Come on. But
Yeah.
one of those times that really, really hit for me was years ago. We had to make a big change with our CFO, and that's such a critical role. It's such a partner role to a president, CEO. So difficult to go through. And it was personally really difficult. Our CFO suffered more that day than I did, but it was one of the worst things I ever had to do. Our partners were chiming in on the side and letting me know, like, when are you going to do something about this? And of course, I couldn't tell them I'd been working on it. And he was a really popular guy, and I made the decision, made the change. And then after the fact, some of these same people who were partners pressing on me about it wanted to wash their hands of it too when it happened. And oh my gosh, can't believe you did that. Wow. It's like I'm the angel of death walking around after that. And it's like, so it's like somebody's got to go out and do that from time to time. That's not fun. It's messy, but I've always taken that duty really seriously.
That's a great comment, Tim. I love that you hit on that. I imagine we've all experienced that where a lot of us, I think we very genuinely do a lot of due diligence. We take our time to vet out what's really happening here and what is strategically called for. But some of your allies in the process, they're allies in theory, but once it becomes practice, they distance themselves. And that's a form of loneliness, I think, that surprises people the first couple of times that they experience it. I've come to grips with the fact that, like you said, Tim, I'm now that person, right? And the thing about being that person is that a lot of the perspectives on me at this point, because we're kind of in these figurehead roles, they're not based on me. They're based on previous experiences. They're based on a philosophy or even a paradigm for what management is or what authority is, or even the types of decisions that we have to enact. And so you really have to guard yourself against taking that personally or feeling like that is a reflection of yourself. But then you also have to stay open to, if there is a part of that's a reflection of me, I need to address that. I need to deal with it. And that's part of the loneliness, I think.
So Craig, I think one of the other areas that's been challenging for me over the years, my family was non-negotiable, and I wanted to achieve something and wanted to experience some success from a career standpoint. The plate that I couldn't keep spinning was on the friends side of things. And so I made friends inside of work, and that was super powerful while the vision and the friendship all moved at the same speed. But it became really, really painful when the vision kind of outran the person. And again, that sense of duty has always been strong. We evolved and shifted. And I guess I know what that says about me as a leader, but I don't always love thinking about what maybe that says about me as a friend. But I just always took the weight of, 200 families counting on good decisions. And I might be a personal friend with somebody that became that way, that evolved on the leadership team in a big role, but the business shifting and we need to go in a different direction. And you still have to man the post, and do that. But that was really hard. And it spilled over in the personal life, in the sense that some of those special relationships became special relationships to my spouse, my kids even. And so when things maybe blew up at work later on, that had collateral damage for my spouse and my kids as well. And that always felt unfair. My wife sometimes looks back and says, I don't know, maybe we should have done things differently. And I always tell her I don't have any regrets, though. I wouldn't have made it if I couldn't have had the great times of the ride. To me, far outweighed the pain that came at different points in time. I wouldn't have made it without those relationships, but it hurts. And I feel for them as well, because sometimes they couldn't just see me as their friend. I'm the CEO at the end of the day. And those can be difficult things to reconcile and compartmentalize.
Mark, you mentioned earlier that conversations with your direct reports over the long run, it's just maybe not sustainable. And then Chris, you mentioned like there are some things that you just no longer talk about in social circles. Like you're done explaining. And then Tim, I can really relate to what you just said there, because yesterday I got some tough news and I was at home and my wife had all these plans. And I said, I just want to be here with the kids playing a game. I don't care what's going on. I need to feel connection here. I guess my question to you guys is like, who do you talk to? You mentioned family, and hopefully they're not the punching bag, although we have our bad moments, but who do you go to? Who do you connect with, and how do you find them?
I'll jump up first, just because I plugged ACHCA on the introduction, but leaning into your professional society, whether it's a trade group, I'm fortunate that by the nature of my licensure, there's a built-in cohort of individuals that are just like me all over the country. And when I really got involved with that group, made really impactful friends that were in similar positions, that were experiencing similar things. And a couple of these guys, and I'll plug them, Matt Lassard in Maine and Blair Kwasnitzka down in South Carolina, I would have never met them had I not gotten involved at a national level within that professional society. And I won't say I talk to those guys every day, but it's almost every day, because something comes up. Even last night, I had a very serious situation come up at one of my communities that I'd never come across, and reached out to them and said, "What have you guys experienced this? It's super unique. It could have pretty significant consequences." And even though they hadn't gone through that exact scenario, they had good advice. I'm also lucky that my wife is a licensed post-acute and aging services administrator. She's not been in practice since our kids have been born, but also having her knowing or having done the job in the past, having that at home as well, especially when I'm drifting into something that she knows that I had better course correct, and she can be very honest with me. Hey, you're about to do something stupid, don't.
Yeah, for me, I think I just really agree. There's a number of circles kind of, and the closest one for sure is my wife, and I'm blessed to have a supportive partner in the work from that standpoint. But other industry CEOs and being a part of that industry association is key. The other one then is local nonprofit CEOs. We have an opportunity there's a group of us who meet almost on a monthly basis. So those are really helpful, because you can kind of compare notes with people who either understand the community from a leadership perspective or the industry from a leadership perspective.
Hey, Craig, while Chris is coming back on, one of the things that's been just amazing, it's along the lines of what Mark said, but I've done a little bit more formally, maybe with groups like Vistage or executive forums. And for me now, the last 13, 14 years being a part of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, has been absolutely huge. So I have a forum of 7 other CEOs that we meet once a month. In fact, tomorrow's our next meeting date. And I know when I originally joined that group, my wife had heard from a few people that like a cult or something, and she was a little bit worked up. And then now I think she would tell you she's always checking. So when's your next YPO meeting? Because I think it's group therapy is what it must look like. Anyway, when I come home, I'm better. Anyway, I'll put it that way. But when I think back in particular, one of the things that, and it ties into all this loneliness piece, is so many of these issues too. There are ways to simplify your life and so on, so you can put the time in where you want it and do the things you want to do. And I had created all of, well, A, B, and C are all true, therefore I can't solve D. It's just this perpetual issue. And they had a bit of an intervention and, just being direct about things. Well, wait, back up. Why is A unsolvable? Why is B? And, at the time for me, that was Gibson had never had executive assistants in its 75-year history before me, ever. And it was like, what do you think, you're better than somebody? That was kind of the mantra, like, we work hard here and you figure it out. And what I realized, and that was one of those big pushes that, believe it or not, was uncomfortable to go to the board and say, we need to create this new role. I need help. But that became this force multiplier that I've far surpassed in productivity, more importantly to this conversation, enjoyment. I got to spend more of my time doing the things that brought me energy, which takes away from the loneliness. By doing that, and all that, I give credit for so much of that back to this peer group of people that'll challenge you and you're thinking of, why have you decided that, like, you're dealing in this small little box, you're trying to solve a problem, there's more solutions, you haven't thought about them. And so to have people like that have sat in their own version of the chair, maybe have seen different movies than you have seen, and they can tell you how a lot of those movies end, just so valuable.
The thing I'll add, because I'm not sure where I cut off, certainly, yeah, I think you have to have people in your life who are not impressed by your title and who have no issue at all speaking into your life and helping you kind of see yourself in the mirror a little bit. I think the other thing that might vary from person to person a little bit, but part of a person's willingness to serve at this level is probably also a willingness to carry more internally than you might in other positions. And so I think a person being willing to do that is pretty important to sitting in the chair. There's just some things that are hard to express in any context.
I think something that we haven't touched on yet, but I think it's important, is have a mentor. Even at the CEO level, I always had a mentor. I have a mentor now because there's always somebody that has been there before you. And I would rather learn from someone else's mistakes than make my own. And you would be surprised how many people, if you ask them directly, hey, you've been very successful in your career, maybe you're retired, maybe you're close to retirement, would you spend an afternoon with me or 30 minutes with me once a month, once every other month? People are willing to help. And so finding that mentor that can help you stay honest with yourself, that can keep you accountable, that will force you to write down goals. I just think it's very powerful and it's very underrated, because I think some people mistake the fact, and I know I did this when I became a CEO for the first time when in my late 20s, was I had it figured out. I made it to the CEO. I don't need anybody else's advice. I got here because I am the smartest guy in the room. I know more than everybody else, and I know how to do all these things. Now, obviously, as you mature, you figure out that's not true. But having that mentor there to do all the things that we talked about, whether it's a peer group or otherwise, I just can't state enough how much of an impact that's made for me.
Craig, something else that's been valuable on my end of things, I would let some of these things fester. And so I gave a story earlier about a CFO, but I replaced that CFO with actually a worse problem, and tried to replace it with 2 people. And I had a senior ops leader and a CFO, and they were both vying to, I think, probably to be me or my role or whatever. And they couldn't stand each other. And I was putting up with all this. And here I'd had 2 people on board, solved it in a much more expensive way than the problem I was trying to fix prior. And then I let the noise get even louder and worse. And So one of the things, and we put an operating system in place maybe 10 years ago now at Gibson, and it was a game changer because yeah, I'll just say it. I mean, I was being a chicken on some of these things and I needed to deal with them. It's easy to deal with the obvious issues. The ones that are kind of gray are the hard ones. I was letting this happen, had no idea actually the toll it was taking downstream, but the operating system kind of gave us this regular rhythm, to talk about issues, to force them on there. I was able to hide behind the fact that I had to put together a new, accountability or organizational chart and lean into that. And it kind of gave me a framework to stiffen my spine up a little bit. And ultimately it exposed, and both of them ultimately left the company. And that's when we really took off. So that's been a tool, I think, to help with some of these things that end up piling on and you think you're the only one that can solve them.
I'm going to jump in here because, Tim, you shared a story earlier about you're now corporate and you may not have been invited to those functions as much as you were previously. As you guys think about the title and you think about you as an individual, as a human being, how do you protect yourself from moments like that of like, oh, I'm just not invited anymore, or oh, the CEO's in the room. I've got to be much more aware of what's happening. Or I guess how do you separate the two and just continue to lean into who you are as an individual and your own purpose, your own passions, and not let the title impact you?
A couple things I think of are, number one, you begin to recognize, and I think this is also a gradual recognition, but your experience of everyone around you is a curated experience. You're not getting the raw experience, and you used to get the raw experience. So that's the ability to participate socially, things like that. I think for me, you can resent that, you can regret that, but I think you have to sort of embrace, I've signed up for this role. I want to be able to dissociate myself from it, but I really can't dissociate myself from it. And that's part of what I signed up for. So
right.
I try not to go so quickly back to I took comfort in the first few years in the role with this idea of, well, they don't know me. And that's not who I am. But really I chose to take a role like this that changes how people interact with me. And so I think part of it is just reconciling yourself to that reality, and also trying to not become cynical in the midst of that, and trying to still appreciate the genuine moments and not be so suspicious that, well, there's probably an agenda behind this. I think it's a learning process.
Absolutely. At least over on the senior living side, our work can provide so much depth and meaning just by the nature of what we do, especially in our business that's mission driven, not for profit. We're helping older adults continue to contribute and find meaning and everything that is around giving someone a really great lived experience. And if you're wired to take that seriously, it is easy for that role to become part of your identity. And we do have to be very careful with that. But I have to remember that the title is a responsibility. It is not me. My identity is not going to be too tied to the role, because when I let that happen, every problem feels like it's a failure. Every criticism feels like an attack. And when you're dealing with thousands of people, both on the team member side, but also on the resident side, there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of opinions about the way that certain things happen, especially when you're operating communities that have full service restaurants, retail, all the things that they're really like little small towns, and you're the mayor. And so if you don't do that, you will beat yourself to death with the criticism if you're internalizing those things. And I think that's what a lot of young leaders in my industry, they get caught up in, and it just caves them in. They can't separate it enough. But the ones that do end up being really successful long term. But that being in the people business, and everybody's got an opinion, and they live there. So, I mean, this is 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it sounds like ADEC's a little similar with that, with, support services, just a different population. but you've got a lot of stakeholders. It's not just the
Yeah.
it's not just the direct customer. It's all those indirect customers and team members. And when you're responsible directly or indirectly for 4,000 or 5,000 people, that can be a lot. And
Yeah.
so really understanding, okay, this is not about me. This is not about me. This is about a situation that I'm going to have to help guide people through, and people may not like what I have to say.
Yeah.
Because, and you guys understand this, even though it may be right, it's not going to be popular. And there's going to be consequences. And I have to understand that even though I'm going to be criticized, that's okay. That's part of this. Because if you don't like criticism, go do something. I had a partner years ago, if you want to be popular, go sell ice cream. Everybody's happy to see the ice cream man. You want to do the hard stuff, get in leadership.
Yeah.
Craig, I think one of the cool things we heard today, though, is that it doesn't have to be completely lonely and isolating. Though there are some great ideas here. Mark and Chris both shared some of those peer groups and mentors, and if you're lucky, you can talk to a spouse and all that. But as much as I think we leaned on all that, and that maybe people don't understand, you also, I know I had a tendency maybe to bottle it up, and if you do it right and you build your leadership team correctly, there are people there that may not be able to fully feel it, but they want to, and they want to be there and support you and help you. And when you make that turn and you can trust, it's pretty amazing. As Craig, I had some major surgeries and health scare a few years ago, and when it was one of those first times that I truly had to just shut everything down, and our LT jumped in, and David and Brock did an amazing job. And one of those first times, though, that also made me feel safer that I'd felt in a long time. Like, you know what? All those conversations, all the mentoring I tried to provide myself to them, it worked. And when you don't really know till the storm comes and how it's gonna be. So I do think leaders probably, you kind of self-fulfilling, you get in this in your own, spiral, and you can share some of this with your team. And I think they want it. And that's really how you build out the longer term legacy and succession anyway.
Yeah, I resonate with that, Tim. I think while you're right, you have to be measured to a degree, but there's potential consequences to opening up to a level, but I think sometimes those consequences pale in comparison to not opening up at all in some of those circles. So it's a constant battle to build the team around you where you can have as many of the open, candid conversations as possible, but maintaining some wisdom around how far you go with that in any given circle.
Right. Well, and I think also if we don't, then we don't make it safe. We're not teaching the leaders that support us that number one, that it's 100% necessary. We are all human. We're not made of stone and just constantly emanating that aura of success and confidence and brilliance. We're human just like they are. And when I have been the most vulnerable and the most human with leaders that supported me, the engagement on their part, the loyalty, the commitment, all of those things improve. Because they see, okay, you're a person just like I am. You make mistakes too. You make bad decisions, because it's true. We all do.
Yeah.
And sometimes that facade starts building up, and it's not a good example to provide people that are watching you, whether you're team members, support leaders, or even your own kids.
That's good, Mark. Yeah, that's good. As you think about, Tim, you mentioned chirping from the sidelines. And I think about, so I coached college basketball for 11 years. And we'd always talk about, although it's just one seat over, assistant to head coach, it's a big change. As you think about somebody that's maybe on the sidelines that's chirping right now, what advice would you give to them to get a taste of this, or to think differently about this, or to expose them differently to this? Yeah, what advice would you give them there?
Craig, what advice would you give the person chirping or the leader?
I'd say the one chirping. Folks that may be listening to this may not be in that on the top level leadership, but how can they get exposed to it or think differently about it? Let's go there.
Well, I think starting point from a leader's perspective is the person chirping have some basis for the chirping and or deserve the opportunity to chirp. So it's worthy of the time and the investment. And then I haven't really ever learned any other way than just pulling somebody aside one-on-one, trying to share a little bit more. There's probably things you can't all the way go to, but you can create some framing for them and say, look, I don't even know if I'm comfortable with this, but I know that I'm balancing these other three things and I'm trying to find something that works for, in our case, for 200 families, not just for you, but you make great points. Getting some feedback, asking some questions, laying some of that out, and then acknowledging you don't have to agree with me, and that's okay. We can all keep going, but at least you might understand why I'm not completely nuts how I'm handling this, but you don't have to like it, and that's okay too. We can agree to disagree, and that's actually gone a long way on that. And that then taught me to kind of put a bow on this a little bit of to try to do more of that on the front end when you're explaining things to everybody, is just be more direct and offensively go there um, and mention it right out of the gates. Be purposeful about that, of how it's been framed, so that people can get a little bit of insight into your head of what makes you tick and why you're thinking the way you do.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I just think I've seen time and time again that the difference between when you have that conversation that you just described and you don't is miles and miles apart. You really can stem some of I talk about sometimes the waters get poisoned, and you can do an awful lot to stop the waters from getting poisoned when you can have that conversation. And I try and approach it very similarly too, of being very honest about the fact that I have a perspective on this issue. I've tried to collect other perspectives. Here are some of the tensions that I'm trying to balance as I make this decision. It's fine if your perspective may view that differently, and I respect that. Here's where I'm coming from. People, I mean, I think we're just wired to value that type of conversation a lot. So I agree. And the other thing I would say, Craig, to your question is, just like I couldn't quite put myself in the shoes before filling the shoes, I think sometimes we live under the fallacy that, well, I moved up through the ranks too, so I know what it's like. The reality is we don't know what it's like. Any perspective that isn't our perspective is not a perspective we can fully occupy. So even our own humility in acknowledging that, that's why I often say before a decision, I am making the best decision I know how to based on the information I have, but it may not be the right decision, but I do have to stand by the decision.
Because sometimes you just have to make a decision that you can do all the due diligence you can, but at some point you got to pull the trigger and say, okay, this is the direction we're going. And if it doesn't work, we'll pivot.
Craig, it's one little funny story on that too. Over the years, I blended my work and my family and all those things together. And I didn't try to keep things private from my kids because I thought these were good learning opportunities. So you'd be in that car and going somewhere and you'd get the call from one of the partners about the other partner, or you made a tough decision. And of course, I made the decision I thought was right. So I wasn't backing off that. When I got off the phone, I usually always pause, especially with Jack and Will. And I'd be like, okay, just so you know, that guy's going home tonight. Here's what he's telling his wife about, I'm a terrible person because of this. I'm a jerk, this. I don't agree with that, but you guys should at least, because they're sitting there like shell shocked after hearing, like they're hearing this conversation in the car. And I'm like, so there's a lot more to it. He's not happy either and all that, but this is what I had to do. And as the boys have gotten older, they've referred to those things they accidentally heard as being pretty valuable.
Right.
Craig, we never talked about you, by the way.
Thank you. They were out of the house at that point in time.
That's right.
And I'm thankful for that. As you know, if you're on and you want to start submitting questions, for the guests, go ahead. My question to you guys is, what advice do you wish you would have received, or that you wish you would have received prior to taking the seat, or in the seat, a lesson that you had to go through and learn yourself, or somebody offered up some advice and you're like, gosh, where was that 3 years ago? Anything come to mind?
think humility. I think Chris touched on that. I think that as a young leader, I won't name the big four accounting company that was auditing our business at the time, but I had an auditor tell my board that I was an arrogant son of a bitch. So definitely that when I was humble enough to accept my situation, everything around being a leader, I got 100 times better. And I've actually gone back to folks that I worked with earlier in my career and apologized for them suffering under my leadership while I figured it out. And I had to get knocked around quite a bit by circumstances and really strong people that let me evolve into the leader that I've been probably over the last 10 years, which is much better. People respond to me better. Things get done more easily. I don't have to be a bull to get things done. And that was a tough lesson. So that's probably, Craig, and I don't know if someone gave me that advice when I was 27 years old, if I would have taken it, but man, that's good advice.
That's kind of the irony of the question, Craig. And I like the question, but part of the irony is, would we have actually heard that advice that we should? For me, what I would refer to is, I bet every one of us would say we don't love the politics or the drama in our work. And that's a true statement. However, I think we don't always train enough or prepare enough around political dynamics and their impact. We can talk about how we hate them all day long. We can talk about how we try and avoid them all day long, but they're still there and they're still a factor in leadership. And so I think I was fortunate to be in some kind of cohort based, kind of experiences after taking the role that actually explicitly worked on some of those dynamics. And I just remember at that time thinking, oh my goodness, this is so true, but nobody talks about it. And so I think more preparation around, look, there's going to be a political element to every relationship in your role. That doesn't mean you have to be a political person, right, but you can ignore that at your own cost.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. Craig, I just kind of say, hey, if you're in the seat right now and you're feeling like this, you're not broken, because it is hard. You might have tried your whole life to find a way to get to that chair and you wanted to do it. And now it's like, this is what I was trying so hard for. So it's real. All the things that got us into the seat, all the wiring that helps with that is partly the same reason you're feeling that way. And I think the antidote is not pretending that it doesn't exist, but it's like so many of the answers or the solutions involve relationships. And so just like anything else, trying to build those in advance so you're ready when it comes, because it's going to come. You're going to feel this way at various times. And a lot better to have that peer group going or that special friend or colleague relationship. So when it does happen, you've got an outlet and you don't just bottle it up.
Let's explore that outlet. I actually, right before you said that, Tim, I wrote down the word bottleneck. What are your guys' outlets as you've identified that you need one or need a few, whether it be peer groups or working out, or I guess how would you coach somebody through decompressing and being kind of getting back to the human behind the title? What's that look like for you guys?
For me, for sure, having, I mean, and my family is a place I go home where I'm just dad, I'm just husband. Nobody's impressed with, all this other stuff. That helps you focus. I'm part of a church, and even I actually travel a bit to get to church. And so the church I'm a part of is not within the communities I'm most active in my leadership role. That's a really good thing for me. So church is not political for me. Well, it is a lot of times for leaders because you're in that same community, but that's a unique thing for me, but I feel fortunate with that. I think I love certainly getting out, walking, reading, interacting, but I think just those settings where you can feel like you're relating just like a normal human are really therapeutic for these roles.
Right. And I think it's individual to every person. You've got to find your thing, right? What is it that grounds me? Chris, you touched on family, spirituality, self-development, but you've got to find out, okay, what is it that works for me, whatever that is, and really develop that, because I think it's easy to get stuck in some of those traps where you don't become grounded, you don't have an outlet, and you burn out. And I've seen so many leaders, even before they get to the C-suite, they don't have a way, they don't have an outlet, and they just burn themselves out.
Well said.
What's that look like for you, Mark? You individually, like you personally, what?
Yeah. Tons of time with family. So my kids are involved in all different kinds of sports, and I don't coach their sports. I leave that to the professionals, but I do enjoy all the aspect of that. I also like to be outside, spending time in nature, going to national parks, those type of things. It in spaces that you feel very small and insignificant is very grounding to me, even if that's a really majestic church or going out to Sedona and seeing some of these massive rock structures and Grand Canyon, those type of things. So, and I think it changes too. Depending on the circumstances, depending on what I need to be grounded from, is going to change what the tool that I reach from in the toolkit.
Well, as we start to close this thing out, guys, I guess give me just, and Tim, you mentioned earlier on, it's an honor to have the title. And Chris, you said, we said yes to this. Like we wanted this. And in our previous conversations, Chris, you mentioned you have to be called to this also. Based upon what you guys heard in this conversation amongst each other, what are either some reminders, some things that maybe you've even reflected upon entering into this conversation, or even just some takeaways that you're leaving this and you're thinking, man, I got to share this with somebody else, or I've got to think about that, or I need to do that. Yeah, go ahead and close us out, each person on that thought.
Well, first off, it's really been a pleasure learning from both Mark and Tim, hearing your experiences. They resonate a lot. I think for me, what I've reflected on is the importance of sort of accepting and moving into the very challenges we're talking about today. We need to reconcile to those and sort of see them as if we're spending a lot of energy trying to make it some other way, we're probably kicking against the goads. We're fighting a losing battle. So we need to kind of move into, I feel like every challenge has a benefit to it as well. We took this position because we believed that the calling and the opportunity outweighed the costs. And I think that's true of this as well. Where are there silver linings, even in the challenge of the loneliness and the pressure of the position? For me, I know that the payoff, and I mean, I think you grow faster the more you experience those valleys of decision and the more intense they are. And I wanted to grow, so that I should be thankful for these opportunities.
Right. And just building off of what Chris says, embracing that loneliness is not unnatural. You're going to feel it, right? You're going to lean into it. And it's not the silence necessarily, it's the responsibility for all of these people. And you have to be ready for that. And you have to have the temperament for that, because when you understand that when you are part of senior leadership or the senior leader, all eyes are on you. Your decisions impact everything. And if you don't bear that responsibility seriously, don't do this. There are ways to make money, but understanding that the way you behave, the way you interact, the way you handle situations, they impact real people. And those real people have real families. And understanding that level of responsibility is a blessing and it's an honor, but it's also something that cannot be taken lightly. So if you're in it for the title, don't do it, because it won't be worth it.
Yeah, man, Mark and Chris, I think nailed that, Craig. And like what I heard today about this. I think build those relationships ahead of time so you have those places to go, and people are going to shoot you straight and tell you that you have no clothes on. The emperor has no clothes. Second thing, though, and I wouldn't overlook it, is there are some practical things that can be done to change the role. I mean, just because you inherited the seat in a certain way doesn't mean you can't modify it, shift it, whether it's an EA, whether it's sharing some of the functions of the job that you don't love as much. So it's trying to build up the energy zone for what you do love on that. And then I thought Mark and Chris did a great job too of then the after hours outlet, whether it's you're a crazy marathoner, or you like to just take a walk or hop on the boat and do a couple pontoon laps, but having that place to just get it. Those three things, though, all of those can have a really, really big impact.
Great.
Gentlemen, thank you for doing this, for just sharing your experience, the things that you've learned, things that you wish you would have learned at a younger age, and just being vulnerable. And that's the conversation. If you take one thing with you, the loneliness is real, but it doesn't have to be isolating. Build the relationships before you need them, the peer group, the mentor, the people who will tell you the truth. Thank you again to our sponsors, Rippling and the Ascent Collective. If this one hit home, share with a leader who needs it. And I'm Craig Heatherly. See you next time on the Path Less Traveled podcast.